Ok. Cuentan los pescadores aquí en la isla de Portete que había un lugar que era pesado. Pesado significa que era misterioso, donde no podían entrar ellos porque habían mujeres pescados o lo que hoy se llaman sirenas. Era un lugar muy misterioso, muy sagrado para ellos. Es aquí donde dicen que habían sirenas y ahí hay una. Hemos encontrado una. Está descuidada, no nos ha visto que viene por el teléfono. ¿Ven? Vamos a... Aquí está la sirena, una sirena en Porteto. No hay vida real.
Well, hello there, Sheryl.
Turf Wars, a battle of wits, knowledge, and creativity. Which naturalist will prove they're the best? Choose your fighter and watch the action unfold on Turf Wars!
Well, Sheryl, what luck! I have found a hermit crab, and I think that this perfectly matches your challenge of finding an animal that carries its house on its back. In fact, I believe that I get 2 for 1 because it doesn't even grow its own shell. So really the shell on the back is that of a snail. So yeah, I definitely think I get bonus for this one. There are many species of hermit crabs, and some live in the ocean and some live on the land. The ones that live in the ocean preferentially choose shells that are harder and thicker because the water provides buoyancy and the shells aren't as heavy for the hermit crab to carry around. Plus, under the ocean, the hermit crab has a lot of different predators to contend with, and many of those predators are specially adapted to be able to crack open and break open heavy shells. So hermit crabs that live in the ocean preferentially pick shells that are really thick and really hard, so that way it's harder for predators to knock them open. Hermit crabs that you find on the land, like this one, preferentially choose shells that are smaller and lighter. Sometimes hermit crabs will even carve or hollow out the shell just a little bit more to make it that much lighter. The good thing about stealing someone else's shell is that you don't have to waste resources trying to grow your own. The bad thing is that every time you do grow and you do get bigger, you need to find a home that now fits you. This hermit crab has chosen the shell of an invasive species, the African land snail. The African land snail is doing a lot of damage to people's farms and to people's gardens, and you can pretty much just find them everywhere. They're just a big pest. Before, hermit crabs would choose other shells, but with people visiting so much here, people are taking all the really big, pretty shells that hermit crabs would normally be using for their home. And so the hermit crabs don't really have any choice but to use the shells that are available, which is a bunch of these shells left behind by the invasive snails. Most hermit crab tails curve to the right, and that's because most snail shells also curve to the right, and they're all considered to be right-handed, like me. I hope you liked learning a little bit about our hermit crab friends, and I'm excited to give you your challenge, but first, let's check in with some other contenders. My dad did the same challenge as you, but he even suggested that my challenge wasn't hard enough because he suggested that the invasive species and the native species should somehow be related to each other. And he provided the example of the American chestnut tree and the subsequent chestnut blight, which is a type of fungus that came from Asia, and how it basically decimated the American chestnut. But as for your version of the challenge, I really liked it. I will give you 4.5 out of 5 stars. I would have really liked to see these plants with leaves on them, but I also can kind of understand that it's winter. I thought it was so cool, the sumac plant, how you showed us how you can use that plant. I thought that was really, really interesting and a really nice touch.
Staghorn sumac also grows stalks of red berries in the fall to feed birds as a nice alternative to honeysuckle berries. As a bonus, these berries are edible by humans too. You can eat them fresh or dry them and use them as a seasoning. They taste slightly like lemons, but sweeter, so you can make sumac lemonade or use powdered berries to season meats and vegetables.
Well, Sheryl, now it's time for me to give you your challenge. I want you to find me an organism that is adapted to harsh climate. I'm going to consider harsh climate your winter. I know you probably don't think it's harsh, but I moved to Ecuador, so I think all winter is harsh. So I want you to give me 5 adaptations that that organism has to be able to live in that harsh environment. I'm going to be showing off the mangroves, but I have to wait a couple hours because I'm stuck in this cave until the tide comes back up. Well, Sheryl, I managed to swim all the way out here to the mangroves just to tell you a little bit about them and their adaptations. So, even though we are at the equator and we get a lot of rain, that doesn't mean that we don't have some harsh climates here. For example, right at the start of the ocean, we have all these beautiful mangroves, and living out here is a little bit harder than you might think. While we have enough sun and we have enough rain, the mangroves here have to deal with a whole bunch of other tough environmental conditions. First of all, the water is super salty. The ocean is right there, and this river does turn into fresh water further up in that direction, but that's quite a while from here. So these trees need to be able to handle high amounts of salt. The other thing is that they are completely out in the open. There's no coverage, so it's really easy for them to get too much sunlight. And of course, they have to deal with the rising and falling of the tides. And the tide exchange here is actually pretty impressive. Somewhere between 3 and 4 meters, or around 9 to 12 feet. So that's a lot of space in between when the water is high and the water is not high. In this area, we have 4 common mangroves: the white mangrove, the red mangrove, the black mangrove, and the botoncillo, or the green buttonwood mangrove. The first thing that the mangroves need to do is to be able to filter out the salt. The red mangroves can filter out up to 90% of the salt just in their root system. But not all mangroves can do that, and even the red mangroves still have a little extra salt that they need to deal with. Some mangroves have specialized glands to pump salt out at the base of their leaves, and other mangroves can excrete the salt through old bark. You can tell sacrificial leaves on the mangroves because they are this yellow color because they just die. There's too much salt, they can't support the life, and these little yellow leaves fall out and die. But it's a sacrifice the tree needs to make sure, it can photosynthesize the rest of it, and they have a way to get rid of that extra salt. The second adaptation that mangroves have is that the soil here is really, really shallow. Like, there's not a lot of good soil for them to latch into and use, either for support or for nutrients. So many mangroves have these long, spreading, lateral roots that run way horizontal, not very deep, but very lateral, so that way they can be grabbing and catching and absorbing all of these different nutrients. Other mangroves, like this one and some of the red mangroves that we've passed, have what are called prop roots, which help stabilize the tree, especially in those areas where the tide comes in and out, and there's a lot of variation between when the tide is high and when the tide is low. These prop roots offer stability, but they also provide a lot of ecosystem services. For example, they help stabilize the coastline and prevent erosion from happening, and also protect against big weather or storm events. These twisting and turning roots are really important to create secluded and sheltered habitat for many young fish, and also for other animals to lay their eggs. And also, you can find clams in conchas. This is how the local people here get your clams for your ceviche. Is they come out into the mangroves, they go into the muddy areas, they literally just stick their hand in and look for these types of conchas or clams. Because there are so many animals using this area as shelter, not just from the rough ocean currents, but also those predators out there, they unfortunately have to contend with a whole bunch of their own predators, mainly birds, that are always searching this area to grab up a quick shrimp, to grab up a quick clam, to grab up a quick snail, to grab up a quick crab. And that makes mangroves a beautiful, amazing habitat and a refuge for many bird species. Mangroves are growing in a low air environment because they are underwater most of the time. They have to deal with the fact that there isn't any air in the soil. Even when the tide goes out, it's still full of water. Black mangroves have a special type of root structure called pneumatophores, which stick up from the soil and are there to help get air from an otherwise airless environment. And finally, the mangroves have a really interesting mode of reproduction reproduction. The red mangroves, for example, have these really long seeds which just grow from the trees. And what happens is the seed is actually basically, as you can tell, like a little plant already. And if it falls into soft mud, it will just stick upright like this into the soil and start growing. Otherwise, it will fall into the water and float upright. And they will float upright until they enter a place that's shallow enough for them to get stuck or put their roots down and make more mangroves. Well, Sheryl, I cannot wait for you to show me some organism that is highly adapted to handle, I'm guessing, your winter as your harsh climate. And if you are playing along at home, I'm so excited to see what interesting organisms you can show me from your deserts, your winters, your whatever harsh climates that you have wherever you are living. If you want to play along, don't forget to tag us at any of these social medias, and we will love to include your submission into one of these carnivore videos. Until then, I will see you all very soon.